Good day, everybody, and welcome to this Wellbeing of Women webinar for April 2025. You're joining a monthly webinar series where we talk to really great experts at lunchtime, and they give us their candid opinions about problems that really trouble both girls and women. And today we're going to talk about the female reproductive hormones, which is a really very large subject, and we're going to try and understand their impact. And I've no doubt that you're going to leave this webinar audience feeling a whole lot more knowledgeable, because the people you've got today are not just very expert in their fields, but they're also great communicators, which is why I've chosen them to be with me today. But the other thing I want to say is that today is a very special day for our charity Wellbeing of Women. Remember, it's the only charity that funds every aspect of women's health and funds research, education and advocacy across the life course. And today, I'm very proud to announce that we're launching Hormonall, which is spelt hormonal with an extra L on the end, double L. And it's our platform together for women's wellbeing. And this is a global partnership that we've set up with Vichy laboratories. And the aim is to help educate women, girls, and the rest of society on the various hormonal changes that women go through at different life stages. And those of you who are regulars to this webinar series know that one of my absolute passions in life is that the great thing about women, one of the many great things about women, is that when you tell them what you think they need to do, not only do they tend to do it, but they tell everybody else in the world about it too, in their family, in their community. So I think we cannot afford not to have women as part of the solution to improving women's health. So what have we done with Vichy? Well, we've co-created 4 e-learning modules on puberty, the menstrual cycle, the postpartum period, and the menopause. And these have really genuinely been co-designed and expertly reviewed to help people understand what is happening to our hormones and the impact our hormones have on our mind and body during those 4 time periods in our lives. And our speakers today are Dr Aziza Sesay and Dr Channa Jayasena. They've been involved in reviewing the models, and so too have Dr Naomi Potter and Dr Varsha Jain, who are individuals that have worked with us in wellbeing and are much trusted experts in their field. So I'd just like to explain to our audience that I think this is going to be a really brilliant resource for people who are approaching or going through one of those periods of their lives or intervals. And there's also a helper module on each of those 4 e-learning modules for anyone who wants to learn more to support someone else. So I'm not excluding the men here. That's why we've got Channa, because it's just as much the men that we want to reach as it is the women. So please, audience, I really urge you to try out the modules. As I say, they have been a work of love and hard sweat as well, both for the wellbeing team and for Vichy laboratories. I think what you'll see when you do try them out is that they're beautifully designed and they're really easy to go through. They've got lots of animations and coupled with concise information, which is designed to help everybody. So I just want to say again, excellent source of trusted information. Thank you to Vichy for reaching out to Wellbeing of Women to do this collaborative project. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce my first panelist, who is Dr Aziza Sesay, who is a GP. But she's not just a GP, she's also the founder of Talks with Dr Sesay, and if you haven't seen them, you're going to be wowed by them, literally. And she's also, of course, an ambassador for Wellbeing of Women. And she's one of those marvellous people that whenever I go somewhere with Wellbeing of Women to meet people in person, there's Aziza. I don't know how she gets around to all these places, but she's always there with this brilliant smile and giving me a big hug. And then she takes the most wonderful photos and sends them to me, because I always forget to take the photos, but she doesn't. So there we are. Aziza, you're going to start off now, aren't you? And you're going to tell us your name and your role and exactly what you're going to tell us about. And then you're going to tell us a little bit, I think, about female reproductive hormones and what can cause or change fluctuations in these. So it's actually quite a complex field, but I have every confidence that Aziza will simplify it beautifully. So over to you, Aziza.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm so honored to be here, and I'm really excited and looking forward to talking about this topic. As Dame Lesley Regan has said, I am a GP, and I'm currently in my GP surgery, but let's talk about female reproductive hormones, okay? So often when we think about female reproductive hormones, we always think about its association with pregnancies and maybe periods, and that's it. Today, I'm going to tell you how magnificent these hormones are. But to begin with, let's talk about how exactly they're released in the first place, okay? I have brought this image to explain, okay? It starts at the very beginning in a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases something known as gonadotropin releasing hormone, okay? It's also classed as GnRH, yeah? When that is released, it does what it says in the thing, in that it stimulates the pituitary, which is another area in the brain, to release gonadotropins. All right. In very simple terms, if we split up the gonadotropin, gonado meaning gonads, so sex hormones, and in our case, that's the ovaries, tropin meaning stimulates. That's what gonadotropin stands for. And we have two: FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, which again, always listen to the name. It stimulates the follicles, right? So it's a follicle stimulating hormone. And then the LH is a luteinizing hormone. Okay, those are the two gonadotropin. Once those gonadotropin are released from the pituitary, they then travel to the ovaries, all right? I always like bringing props because I'm visual. So they travel to the ovaries. This is the internal gynecological anatomy. They travel to the ovaries. We have one on either side. And the ovaries respond by releasing three sex hormones. We always talk about the two, but they release estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Yes, women also release testosterone in small amounts. It's associated with men mostly, but we also release those. So that's just in simple terms. And the reason I brought this diagram is so you understand that there's something known as a negative feedback system, okay? So essentially, when the estrogen levels rise, or the progesterone and testosterone, they then feed back all the way up to the hypothalamus as well as the pituitary to say, hey, listen, there are loads of us. You can stop now. You don't need to stimulate as much. So that's a negative feedback system. Similarly, when there's not enough of the estrogen or the progesterone or the testosterone, again, it feeds back up to say, hello, wake up, please release the GnRH, please release the gonadotropins. We need more of us. Now, what exactly does estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone do, right? As I said, it's not just to do with pregnancy and the menstrual cycle. And by the way, when we talk about the menstrual cycle, I've also brought this image. We have the fluctuations that happen regularly. So once we hit puberty, usually at the age of 10, 11, something like that, it's even earlier these days though, we get the surge release of estrogen, progesterone, and then we start our cycles, right? Now, estrogen, what it does in terms of our gynecological health, it helps in the secondary sexual characteristics. So it gives us the breast development, and also it makes our vulval skin change. We get the hair in different places, basically puberty. But not only that, it regulates the menstrual cycle, and it doesn't just do that, it also helps from our head down to our toes. So it impacts our skin. It makes our skin softer. It makes us glow. It makes our skin, all shiny and beautiful. It also affects our hair. It gives us thicker hair. It stimulates the hair follicles. And then if we go downwards in our brain, it affects our cognition. It makes us more alert. So you'll notice around the middle of the cycle, when the estrogen is highest, that's when we feel like the most sharp, and it's always the best time to get work done. So estrogen is really good in helping with brain function. It also helps with our vision. All right. It helps with, some people notice changes in their voices. It also has an effect on our mood hormones, so serotonin and dopamine, and how they're released. So it impacts our mood. It actually gives us that boost of happiness and feeling well in ourselves. All right. All of this will become important when we talk about what happens on the other end when we lose or the reduction in our estrogen, which I know Prof. Harper is going to talk about in a bit. Okay. It also helps with our bone remodeling. It makes our bones stronger, right? It gets our bone to strengthen and reduces what we call bone resorption. So it makes our bones stronger. It helps with our muscles as well. Are you hearing all of these amazing things that it helps with? It helps again with our sex drive, around the vulval, vaginal skin. It helps with lubrication, strengthening, and all of that. And it helps with our cardiovascular health. So when we think about women, up until the age of 50, we are less likely to suffer with heart conditions. After 50, often due to that decline in the estrogen, we are more likely and we're higher risk of developing heart disease, strokes, and heart attacks, and so on and so forth. And that's because estrogen has such a positive effect on our cholesterol and our overall cardiovascular health. So it prevents the cholesterol from over rising. And all of those things are why it's important that we look into our estrogen, and not only associated with, periods, menstrual cycle. It helps throughout our body. Similarly with progesterone. So progesterone helps in maintaining the womb lining in preparation for implantation, but it also helps to prepare for pregnancy. It supports in breast development. It reduces womb contraction to maintain the pregnancy. And it also helps in regulating our temperature. Estrogen does the same, similar thing. And when you think about the testosterone aspect, it helps within our sex drive as well as our cognition. So I just wanted to emphasize those pointers. And these things can change a lot depending on where we are, for instance, in our cycle. So I often don't like using the words hormonal imbalance anymore, because technically our menstrual cycle, our hormones are doing this anyways. There are conditions that can cause dysregulations where things are out of whack, but not hormonal imbalance per se. Dysregulations is a word I'd rather use. Now, the effects, these hormones are affected by a number of things. And if we think about like the hypothalamic axis, so when I talk about the brain and the release from up there, anything that affects that area can then have an impact on the way that the estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone is released. So for instance, if we are stressed, or if we've lost a lot of weight, that can affect the way that the hypothalamus works. And that can then affect the estrogen, progesterone levels. Also, as I say, what happens within the changes in the menstrual cycle, what we're eating, our body weight. If we're too underweight, I know I mentioned that estrogen is released by the ovaries, but it's also released by our fat cells. So if we are too underweight, we may notice that our estrogen levels can dip. If we're too overweight, our estrogen levels can be quite raised as well, depending on our age. As we get older, as we go into what we call perimenopause, which is around the menopause and into menopause, we get that decline as well in estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Medications that we're taking can impact our hormonal levels, but also hormonal contraceptives that we are taking that can reduce the levels overall through, again, that feedback system. There are conditions like PCOS, thyroid hormone conditions, pituitary conditions as well. All of these can impact. Stress is a big factor, and a lot of us women, we take on a lot of different things. We have this superwoman cape behind us trying to do more than actually we can handle, and that can have an impact on our hormonal levels overall. There are also environmental factors, so things like endocrine disruptors, and these are things that we can find in a lot of products that we have these days, not just makeup, but also the containers that we use for our foods, our cutlery and all of that, and some of the hair products that we're using. All of these things have endocrine disruptors that can affect, again, our overall hormone levels. Sleep is really important. If our sleep and circadian rhythm is affected, that can impact our hormonal regulation, and it can affect how things respond. So it's really important that we have the 7 to 9 hour sleep where possible. I know if you have little ones, I'm talking about something that's pretty much impossible, but where possible, try and get your 7 to 9 hour sleep. It makes such a massive difference. And then there are conditions that are genetic or hereditary that can again affect and have an impact on the overall hormonal levels.
Oh, Aziza, wow, isn't that great? We've got such fabulous feedback on the chat. And yes, please, audience, feel reassured that we are recording all of this, and that tomorrow the Wellbeing of Women team will circulate the video and the link to YouTube, and you will have all the details and also how you can access the Vichy hormonal e-modules for learning. So Aziza, thank you. You started off by saying magnificent hormones, and I'm going to tell you that I think you're a magnificent doctor, because you've explained that so beautifully. And I think that everyone's very appreciative. But isn't that interesting, as so many of the audience have commented, oh my goodness, that's why my vision is, or I have to wear my different glasses on my skin and my sleep pattern. So really, really great. So I'm going to now move on to Dr. Channa Jayasena, who is a very special endocrinologist, a reproductive endocrinologist, and he's going to tell us, first of all, what endocrinology is in the context of the webinar that we're running now. He's obviously got some fabulous slides, and then he's going to talk a little bit about infertility. And then he will also possibly tell us a little bit about hormone replacement therapy. And then thirdly, we will go on to my third panelist, who is Joyce Harper. And well, you've got super things in store for you, ladies and gentlemen. So Channa, over to you, please. Thank you so much for coming and supporting Wellbeing of Women. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. And wow, how can I follow on from such a fabulous talk from Aziza? So I want to really build on what she's talked about and share a bit of my practice. So I'm very privileged to work both in the National Health Service, treating people from around the country with a range of complex problems, some of which I'll talk about. And I also have a research laboratory at Imperial College London, and we're trying to develop better treatments for women and men with these problems. Now, I wanted to tell you how I see hormones. I've been asked to sort of say what's the relevance of endocrinology, and I think if you imagine that your body is like the ocean, then what actually controls these complex undulations of the water, the rhythms, the waves? And that's what hormones do. They're signaling molecules that I'm fascinated by the fact that you can't see. They're there, they're almost mythical. And what they do is that they pull the levers and control the bits of your body, your reproductive system, and they make stuff happen. And I like to use an analogy when it comes to the reproductive system, and that's of an orchestra. Not that I listen to orchestras very much, but the analogy I wanted to make is that you have in the middle a conductor, someone, and in this case it's the brain, as Aziza was saying, the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and you have this orchestration, this of instructions to the ovaries, which move in this rhythm. And this is a beautiful biological process. And I want to come back to this analogy to hopefully illustrate how during the female life course, you can have medical problems which can be treated. So I'm going to break it down into a small number of problems. So first of all is to explain how puberty and delayed puberty happens. So puberty happens when the orchestra starts playing. So children don't have activity of the ovaries, girls, and during puberty, the orchestra starts playing, the ovaries start making mature eggs, which are released, and estrogen will feminize the body, causing things such as breast growth. And so just it's pretty much the same thing, not as what Aziza showed. So you have the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and this orchestra is making the ovaries mature your body from a girl into an adult woman through estrogen as its signal. But if there are any breaks in this chain, so problems in the brain, such as in the hypothalamus or in the ovaries to making this signal, then this puberty doesn't happen, the orchestra doesn't start playing. So in simple terms, structural, sometimes genetic problems, sometimes to do with nutrition as well, can interfere with this process and can make girls go through puberty later. Of course, the opposite is true as well, and some girls go through precocious puberty. They go through puberty much earlier. So when puberty is delayed, we can give hormones to copy what the ovaries make that contain estrogen. That will bring girls naturally through puberty. So as I alluded to, some girls, and it's a particular problem with girls because it can obviously make them feel much less comfortable if they are getting breast growth before the age of 8, which is the cutoff. And what that means is that the orchestra starts playing before the concert. And we can give, sometimes that's caused by a range of things. It can be caused by some structural problems in the brain that may actually push on the hypothalamus and make it artificially trigger puberty before it's meant to be. There are a range of other conditions as well, but we can often give medications to actually make the ovaries switch back off again and therefore help girls who are affected to live their lives and go through puberty at the right time. So I'm just giving a very sort of simple overview here, and I hope we can answer any questions and dive deeper. So I've also been asked to talk about what happens with fertility. Now there are many things, but that can cause fertility, but hormones can be an issue. So as we went back to puberty, the orchestra is needed for puberty, for a girl to actually make estrogen, which will turn her body into an adult female body. But the eggs are also being made by the ovaries. So if this reproductive system is switched off for any reason, then that will cause an absence or a reduction in the number of eggs, which may manifest as irregular or infrequent or absent periods. Now, going a little bit deeper into this, we know, and it's been long recognized, that there is a very tight relationship between weight and fertility. So if we look on, as I move my cursor, on the horizontal axis, we're looking at increasing levels of body mass index, like body weight. And we're looking, if we look at this kind of U-shaped line, we're looking at the chances of having of fertility. And what you can see is that as weight goes down, then fertility can go down as well. I'll deal with the other side in a moment. So as Aziza has said, is that you need your fat cells to signal to the ovaries to work and to the hypothalamus. And so if you do particularly exercise or have lower than average body weight, then you are more at risk of fertility problems. So problems with the orchestra can cause infertility, and lower weight does make this more likely. And again, giving a mixture of hormones, but also coaching to try to see whether you can train to actually increase that weight slightly or exercise less can greatly help. But of course, looking back to this figure, if we look towards the right, we know that higher body mass index can also increase risks of fertility problems. And one of the major ways it does this is a very common condition which affects about 1 in 6 women. And this slide just illustrates some of the issues that affected women can have. And by its name, it's because the ovaries actually contain cysts, but it's probably not the best word. These cysts are actually just natural normal eggs, and women who are affected often have just much higher levels of these eggs that are being released. You can get problems with higher than normal testosterone, which can cause scalp hair thinning, excess hair on the rest of the body and the face, and acne. It can cause metabolic problems such as increased weight and also problems with insulin such as diabetes in later life. And it can cause absent or less frequent periods. And it's increasingly recognized that it can be a real burden on women who are affected, causing high rates of mental health problems. But this is where the contraceptive pill can really help to actually suppress the high levels of testosterone in conjunction with cosmetic help with things such as acne and hair. Exercise is crucial both for metabolic but also reproductive health and improving insulin signaling, and that can be often really effective combined with weight loss and nutrition support to restore regularity of periods and also be an investment for the future to minimize risks of diabetes. And of course, it's so important to not underestimate, which I think historically has been done, the burden on how people feel. And that's why it's so important to access help relevant to where you live, which may include talking therapies, counselling, and speaking to your family doctor. So finally, and I only wanted to touch on this very briefly because we have a wonderful speaker who's going to be talking more in detail about menopause, but through the life course, the menopause is a time when the orchestra stops playing. However, your body will then go through changes, which Aziza has said. So in other words, there may be changes to how you feel, changes to your body, and also changes to sexual function. So the orchestra stops, and there are a range of treatments, one of which I deal with, which is rather simplistically giving hormones back. However, there's a multitude of other things that can be done, and it's fantastic that this is taking much more of a spotlight and being more of a priority now, which is desperately needed. So I just wanted to give you an overview of how we see hormones as these mythical levers that make things happen, and just give you an overview through the life course of the types of fertility problems that can be affected. Happy to answer any questions later.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Channa. That's just very, very elegant, if I may say. How lovely. I love the idea about the ocean and these undercurrents and then the orchestra. So judging by the comments in the chat, you've really resonated with a lot of people by bringing those analogies rather than it just being these arrows going around for these diagrams, which is lovely. So you've been very complementary to each other. So having had the diagrams and knowing where the bits of the anatomy were, you were able to then give us the analogies to make it all dynamic. So as I told you, audience, right at the beginning, or I offered my opinion anyway, we've got some really magnificent speakers. And thank you again, Channa. That's really, really helpful. I'm going to also emphasize that being overweight also affects your fertility as well, doesn't it? And that's often a very difficult thing to persuade women about. But there are some women whose raised BMI or raised body mass index really does affect the way that their ovaries function. And from my side of things, because Channa and I share quite a lot of patients who have miscarriage problems as well, it can really affect the way in which embryos implant in the very, very early days of a pregnancy. So when we ask you to try and normalize your BMI, we're not being mean or fattist or judgmental. We're just saying we know that the reproductive access can be so exquisitely sensitive in some women, particularly in women with this polycystic ovarian morphology. And that's the bit that I can't do the losing weight for you, which is why I have to talk about it and emphasize how important it is. So thank you again, Channa. I think you're going to have a lot of people coming to see me. And yes, it's possible for you to be referred to Dr Channa Jayasena at Imperial College or elsewhere, and we can give you all the details about that. And certainly the ladies that I've sent to him who are very underweight or overweight and have these various problems have been very, very much very appreciative of the advice that he shared with them. So can I move on to Joyce Harper now? Now, Joyce and I go back a long time. I'm not going to tell you how many decades, but yes, it's decades. And we've always found great harmony in talking about the things we're doing because we're both absolutely fervent believers in talking to women and getting them to understand what the issues are. That's half of the battle in terms of promoting better women's health. So Joyce, over to you. And I know that you're going to focus on hormones and the menopause. Well, I mean, you take the stage now and guide us through. Thank you very much, Joyce Harper.
Thank you, Lesley. Always a great pleasure. I'll just make this full screen. And just an absolute pleasure to talk about the menopause. My big passion is education. I've always wanted to make sure that we're all educated. I tried to put in the chat, but unfortunately the panelists can't reply. Somebody said, well, we were never, how are we supposed to know any of this? And absolutely, you were probably not taught about this at school. Probably very unlikely about menopause. I've asked thousands of women if they were ever taught about menopause at school. Very, very few. It is in the UK curriculum. We are working now to make sure that we do talk about menopause in school. But obviously you need to be educated about it when you're around the age where it's going to affect you, and you need much more information. So that's what we're trying to do. And this wonderful event, Wellbeing of Women, these webinars are absolutely fantastic to try and educate people who are really in need of this information. So I run something called the International Reproductive Health Education Collaboration. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things we've been doing, but we have made a resource for teachers to teach this in schools, as I said, including menopause. I also do a podcast. Aziza and Lesley have been on the podcast, again, trying to discuss these reproductive health issues with the public. And I'm going to briefly chat at the end about the project we're doing specifically for the menopause to educate everybody about menopause, and it's called In Tune, and I'll tell you about that. And it's so brilliant that Channa and Aziza both said the importance about lifestyle, and I've become really obsessive about lifestyle. I just think it's so important, and it's one of the most important, if the important preventative medicine for all stages of our life, but specifically to do with hormones, as we're discussing today. And I loved it that Channa mentioned the ocean. I'm going to show you some pictures. We're actually running a research group called Swim Her, and we've published a few papers about cold water swimming and women's health, and one specifically about menstruation and menopause, as I'm aware that many women who swim feel it really helps their menopausal symptoms. So here we are, the ocean. So reproductive hormones, I think, are very, very powerful. And these photos are actually all of me, but I'm in the middle of this one and this one as well. And these reproductive hormones are powerful. They are wonderful. And I think it's great and so exciting for women to have a menstrual cycle through decades of our life. And as Aziza explained, they change, they make us feel different. They're very powerful and very integral to being a woman and being a female. But they are powerful, and sometimes we can feel that we're getting a bit lost in this ocean. For many women, I've done a lot of research with women around their periods, and before their periods, this premenstrual syndrome can, for many of us, feel like we're sort of, in the crashing waves. And I really feel very strongly, and you're going to hear this during this talk, that post-menopause can really feel like this beautiful sunset, which we took at Frinton. For many women, being released and having the change, it's called the change, from our menstrual cycle and from these hormones can actually be the most amazing time of our life, and we can feel very calm and very relaxed. So I think menopause is something we need to embrace, and I'm going to say why I think that. And as everyone said, the two key hormones that are oscillating and then decreasing at postmenopause are estrogen and progesterone. And the two people I've had on my podcast specifically talking about hormones, two brilliant people, Dr Aziza Sesay, who I think is one of the leading voices in the UK around menopause, and Professor Susan Davies from Australia. She's the one who's done so much brilliant work around testosterone and other hormones and how they work around perimenopause. And she's just come onto Instagram. So these two links are both their handles for Instagram. And Professor Davies is doing so much great information and videos about where we actually are with the research. I think her work is absolutely essential. I think she's someone who if you want to know the correct information, really listen to Susan. She's making really great material to promote the right information and dispel the many myths that happen around this. So hormones through the life course. We've heard about what happens in puberty and what happens at fertility. And I'm just going to talk in the next couple of diagrams about estrogen and progesterone. And here we are in menopause. And the first thing I really want to emphasize is sometimes people are using the word menopause in the wrong way. When we start experiencing symptoms and when our periods start to change because estrogen and progesterone are fluctuating, that is actually the perimenopause. But many women, or many people, are calling that menopause. Menopause actually means you've been for 1 year without having a period, and then you are in postmenopause. And some people want to call postmenopause menopause as well. So then they want to call just all of this menopause, which slightly annoys me because they are very different. Perimenopause, these hormones are really fluctuating, as you see here. And it's a very similar situation to puberty. So in puberty, these hormones go through this roller coaster before they really settle down, and they're rising up in our menstrual cycle in our bodies. And in perimenopause, these hormones are roller coastering down until they both come at a low level. They don't totally stop, but they're a very low level. Those that have got teenagers at home or remember themselves going through puberty, it is a time of psychological and physical changes, and that can really change how we feel. And obviously in the perimenopause, that is something that many women experience. So I love this diagram, and someone I spoke to, I've done some interviews for my book, which I'm going to briefly mention because they're really interesting women that I've talked about being postmenopause. And one of them said that when you're in the perimenopause, it's as if you've given a child some different color crayons and told them to just doodle on the paper. And this is what we have here. This is our normal menstrual cycle with these hormones, estrogen and progesterone. As you mentioned, follicle stimulating hormone. There's another one called luteinizing hormone. But we don't have to worry too much about them. We just know that they're quite regularly oscillating in our menstrual cycle, normally, as Aziza showed. In the perimenopause, they've just gone crazy. But then in postmenopause, they're really calm and everything's settled down. So perimenopause with these powerful hormones can be the time when we're really experiencing some menopause symptoms. And there are many symptoms. The list changes and grows continuously as we are learning more about these stages. But menstruation changes definitely happen. Our periods will become shorter, longer, closer together, heavier. Heavy is very common, painful, but they will stop. They will eventually stop. The vasomotor symptoms, these are the hot flushes and the night sweats that many people associate with menopause. And we also have the genitourinary symptoms and sexual difficulties that can result for some women, changes in their genital area, in their vulva and their vagina, in the tissues around them, which can cause some issues. And other conditions, so the psychological symptoms are very, very common. In my research, those are the most common symptoms that women express, that they feel they literally changed overnight. And then they get brain fog, anxiety, depression, they forgetful, lots of other psychological symptoms, but they can overlap with other conditions. We've also got things like joint and muscle pain, fatigue and sleep issues, and weight gain, which is a little bit controversial. Men gain weight at this age as well. And then longer term issues such as osteoporosis, heart disease and Alzheimer's. And I don't have time, obviously, to talk about all of those, but I do want to say a little bit more about hormone replacement therapy. So this is estrogen and progesterone, as Channa said, and the menopause symptoms that it can help are things like hot flushes, the night sweats, the sleep problems, mood swings, anxiety and low mood, and vaginal dryness. And they can be given in all different ways, such as creams and pills and patches. It's not, in my view, it's not necessary for all women to need HRT. I think we've got a sort of pendulum swinging both ways at the moment. Some people are advocating that all women should take HRT as a preventative medicine. I personally don't think the research is there yet, but it certainly can help those women that are having certain symptoms. So I wanted to just finish off by talking about postmenopause. Now, postmenopause, I think, is a time of freedom and celebration. Yes, these hormones are great, but it's actually nice to have a change in our later life and for them to stop. So we have no more cycling hormones, no more menstrual cycle, no more periods, no more PMS, and no more need for contraception. And I've always advocated a very positive view to life post-menopause. Back years ago, if you remember, BBC Breakfast took the brave step to make a whole series of morning programs about menopause. And I was on talking about positivity around menopause. And if you haven't seen the brilliant comedy, The Change, also talking about positivity. And in a number of languages, the word menopause is associated with renewal and energy and second spring and wise women. So TMC is traditional Chinese medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine calls menopause renewal, the second spring. And I want to just dive into that a little bit more. I have interviewed 51 women over 50 who were all thriving. And I didn't know this until after all the interviews were done and I was having a look at the data. This is actually part of my research for a book. And I know it's not big numbers, but it's a qualitative study. And I realized afterwards that only 18 of the women were on HRT. And some of the women that I've interviewed have made some really good points. So Rachel Lancaster says that the menopause is it's a tunnel, it's not a cave. So when we're in that perimenopause experiencing those symptoms, they are not necessarily going to last forever. For most people, they will stop. And Tenor Lady, I don't want to advertise anyone, but they do a brilliant advert. And they said, then it ends and you are more yourself than you ever were. And that's definitely what I'm hearing from women post-menopause, that this can be inspiring and productive and the best time of our lives, a time to think about self and do what we want to do. And on my podcast, I've done 2 series on embracing age and interviewed these amazing people. And just looking at the smiles of the women that I swim with, they have really embraced age, embracing their lifestyle, thinking about their nutrition, sleep, exercise. All of these things are so important. And we are creating In Tune, which Leslie's been involved with, and Aziza. We want women to be in tune with their menopause, in tune with their bodies, and in tune with each other. And I think this program that we're developing, where we want to educate everyone, and we are doing co-design and inclusivity, I think this would also be useful for those that when they're trying to get pregnant. So we want to set this up for menopause, but then I'd really love to set this up for people that are trying to get pregnant, so we can educate them at the appropriate time with information that they need to know. And this is what we're covering. We have something called Be Prepared for Menopause. We've got 18 brilliant videos with some of the leaders of menopause education and treatment in the UK. And the 4 brilliant people at the end are the women, I've had them all on my podcast. They're talking about embracing age. And we're going to cover everything in this. And we're taking Be Prepared for Menopause around the UK at the moment. So my take-home message, there are lots of myths out there on social media, and we have to be really careful that we're listening to the right information. We need to educate everybody about menopause and treat women as individuals. We all need to understand the importance of lifestyle, and it becomes so much more important as we get older. And we have to have access to HRT for those that need it. And I really hope that we all can embrace age and our time when these hormones are no longer so prominent in our lives. Thank you.
Marvelous. Just trying to turn my camera on again. Sorry. Well done, Joyce. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So I love that second spring and new renewal. That sounds a really positive thing. And there's lots of excitement in our audience. Yes, just to reassure everybody, it's being recorded. Yes, you'll be able to see all the slides on the recording, and it'll be coming to you tomorrow. You don't have to worry about it. You have got it. So the great thing is, if you register for these Wellbeing of Women webinars, then you have access to the recordings later on. So what an exciting thing. So we've had the 3 wonderful presentations, and now I've got to sort of pick out some things that I want to ask everybody about. So and also to go into the chat and to try and address some of those questions. Now, there's lots and lots and lots of questions, and thank you also behind the scenes to the Wellbeing of Women team, because they're sending links out as fast as I can read them. So I think you'll be finding that there's links to Hormonall and those e-learning modules, there's links to Joyce, there's links to Channa, there's links to Aziza. So I'm not going to do all of that. I think what I'm going to do now is to ask each of my speakers in turn for a take-home message and something that they think has to be top priority in terms of educating women. And thank you also to those ladies in the audience who said, oh, this is interesting. And my mum, for example, is going through the menopause, and now I feel much better able to support her. And I hope that the men who've joined this webinar as well will be thinking, wow, because we've all, all men have got women in their lives whom they care about and want to have the best outcomes. So whether it's fertility issues or menopause issues or period problems, as you were saying earlier, Joyce, there's nothing that happens to a human being more commonly than 12 periods a year for 40 years of your life. And so if those are debilitating, your life is really miserable. And that's what I've been trying to push in my role as the Women's Health Ambassador, that, period problems may not be life-threatening, but my goodness, they're life-disabling and life-changing. So don't put up with anything, I think, is my motto. You don't put up with anything. And if it's disturbing your life, your day-to-day life, it stops you getting on with whatever you want to do, then go and seek help. So I've given them a few moments to think about what would be their big take-home message. So Aziza, can I turn to you? What would be your take-home message for this highly interactive audience who've been really appreciative and also very appreciative of the thing that I was really hoping would come out of this webinar, and that's 3 totally different types of presenting style, which just goes to show that it's so important when you get people who really know their subject and give them carte blanche, because then they come up with wonderful prizes. So Aziza, over to you. What would be your take-home messages for our audience today?
Of course, first of all, thank you so much to the most engaging, honestly, audience ever. I really appreciate all of the amazing feedback that you've given so far. But my biggest take home is the same as I always say, which is, and Dame Lesley's mentioned it before in regards to what we do, which is this. I want everyone, please, I'm sure that you've learned many gems today, but if there's one thing that you've learned, I would like you, please, to share it with someone else who will hopefully share it with someone else. And then we create the ripple effect of knowledge, which could hopefully save someone's life. And I also want everyone to remember that just because you're a woman or you were assigned female at birth and you have to go through periods and menopause and so on, it doesn't mean that you immediately have to suffer. Okay, let's remove that from the narrative, because unfortunately there's so many who don't realize that they don't need to go through it. So if you're struggling, please don't suffer in silence. If you see someone who's struggling, please give them the support and point them in a direction where they can get the help, because that is not a plight that we have to go through. And also have these conversations. Let's remove the shame, this taboo, the stigma and embarrassment. It's a conversation I've had with my own mom, who didn't really talk about her symptoms, who did suffer with symptoms of, vulval vaginal atrophy and irritation, and did not talk about it, but suffered in silence. So what I want is the next generation of us, as well as us, now who are going through it, not to do that, and seek the help and support that you need and deserve, please. And if you see someone and they're not listening to you, I cannot stress enough, nobody knows your body better than you. Seek a second opinion, or a third, or a fourth. Just don't give up.
Exactly so. So if some symptom you've got, whatever it is stopping you getting on with your day-to-day life, it probably shouldn't be like that. So that's going to be my take home from this. I'm going to move now to Channa. Channa, what would be your take home messages be for our fabulous audience?
Well, thank you. And thank you for giving me a little bit of extra time to think about it. What I want to say is, it's amazing how there are commonalities between what we're all saying. I think one of the saddest things is actually on the chat seeing stories of how women have found barriers and found deaf ears to being listened to. And it's terrible to say that this reflects a male-dominated healthcare system historically. I think the tide is changing, and I think there is more awareness, but so much more is needed. and really thinking exactly what Aziza said. If you are not being listened to, do not stop, okay? Because I get women who will have been suffering with something for years and years and have not had an adequate answer. Now, I take the philosophical approach of saying that there is actually a gap, and I think the medical profession and society are learning more and more about being conversant in women's health condition problems and how to optimize health. But if you think you don't know what's going on with a problem to do with puberty, with fertility, or to do with any part of that menopause transition, then we haven't done enough for you. And so please don't stop until you get those answers, because we need to do better, speaking as a member of the medical profession. And that's my message.
Thank you, Channa, and typically humble and typically self-judging. And I think that's what's really, really, we treasure in you as a colleague and as a participant here of Wellbeing of Women. So I think you just become a Wellbeing of Women ambassador. I haven't discussed it with you yet, but I'm sure you'll say yes if I persuade you. And we would love to have that. And I think that's a really important thing. So we've got to make sure that whatever it is that stopping you getting on or enjoying your life or enjoying your family or going to work, that we resolve that for you, because as you say, we haven't done enough if your life's affected by these things, because we are 51% of the population, remember, and we do over 2/3 of the unpaid caring roles. We're 50% of the workplace. We're 80%, we make 80% of the family health decisions. So really, really influential. As I say, women are not just 51%, but they're making decisions for everybody else. And as I said at a conference that I was at recently, in fact, yesterday it was, the other thing about women that we mustn't forget is that they are 100% responsible for maternities. So, we've got a big role to play. And Joyce mentioned traditional Chinese medicine. One of my most favorite proverbs that comes out of China is that women hold up half the sky, although I personally think they hold up a lot more than just half. I think they do more than their fair share. So with that, I'm going to move on to Joyce. And Joyce, what would your take-home message be for our audience today, over and above what you've already very generously shared with them?
I've been reading the comments, and I'm really trying to hold back some tears, listening to so many women say they've had such problems and been told things like painful periods are normal, heavy bleeding's normal, etc. It's absolutely heartbreaking, and it's not acceptable. And I think we need to really educate everybody. I don't think it's the GP. I don't think you can go to your GP and expect to be educated. That's not really their role. So people like me, the academics, we've got to try and get this sorted out to take that off the burden of the NHS and make sure that we provide proper education for women at all stages of their lives. And starting at schools is something that Wellbeing of Women we're working on. We're working on a menstruation to start with, and we're doing lots of work around that. We're really excited. This is going to come up very soon. We hope. Leslie's been working on this for years. So important. So education is paramount. And then support. We need support. We need to support those girls at school who are having difficult periods, because from the work I've been doing, guess what? Teachers are not taught in teacher training how to support girls with their periods. And I am working on that. I think it's unbelievable. So we're starting at a really negative situation, even with periods. And then we've got fertility, we've got perimenopause. So as Lesley said, we should not have women suffer in silence. We are individual. Because your best friend has got okay periods, or your sister or your mother, and you don't, please don't think, oh, I'm just being, lightweight about this, and I need to just grin and bear it, and it's a woman's issues, and we're going to give birth at some point maybe, and we've got to just carry on. Please do not do that. If you have any health issues that are affecting your well-being and your day-to-day life, you need to get this investigated and hopefully solved, because quality of life is absolutely paramount, and we have to put an end to women suffering in silence.
Thank you, Joyce. And I'm just going to have the last word, if I may, because I think that what I'm very proud of with sharing the charity Wellbeing of Women is how much I think we've been able to break down some of those barriers. We're not there yet. We haven't achieved everything, but as you mentioned, Joyce, we've been doing a lot of work on period workshops and insisting on going around to schools. I always insist that they have two groups of girls at 10 or 11 and then girls at 18, because that's, surprise, surprise, younger people like to have their peers or people who are much nearer their age than me, helping them. And then we invite the boys in at the end. And if the school says, oh, we don't have boys, I say, well, find some, because you've got to find some, because we've got to get the boys educated too. So I agree, we've got to start, and that's how we're going to improve things going forward. But then also, I would say that for the women who missed out on that school education, I want you to go onto the Wellbeing of Women website. And if you're having problems, go to the Just a Period campaign. And what you'll find there is some very simple, very easy to understand questions about your periods. And as I say, you usually have 12 of them a year for 40 years of your life. So if they're disabling you, then do it, and just do it anyway as an exercise. And right at the end of the list of very simple, easy to answer questions, it will ask you for your email. You tap it in, and then a short while later, you get back a letter, which you can then take to your healthcare professional, either in primary or secondary care, and say, look, this is my problem with my periods. Please help me. And I think sometimes when you go armed with something that's written down and objective, you can cut through a lot of the introductory stuff, and then you can get straight to the business. So that's that one. And then, of course, the other thing I would say is there's lots of work about fertility and fertility treatments that you can find on our website as well. And then when we come to the menopause, our campaign before Just a Period was about the Menopause Workplace Pledge. So if some of our participants here today are employing women, and they may be in the menopausal bracket, so anything between the 40s and the 60s, just look at the Menopause Workplace Pledge and see how you can make your centre of employment, or you as an individual woman at that stage in your life, have a much, much easier ride by informing you about all the things that are there to help you. It's not complicated, any of this. In fact, all the things that happen to women throughout their reproductive careers are really quite predictable. So let's make sure that we all promise each other that we're not going to have a situation in which girls are surprised by their periods or surprised that their periods stop, because there's an inevitability, if you're a menstruating person, notice how politically correct I'm being, that you're going to stop menstruating at some time, and for some women it's much earlier than for others. So I think with that, I need to finish in the next minute or so, otherwise I'll get into trouble from the Wellbeing of Women team. And I want to say thank you again to Dr Aziza Sesay, to Dr Channa Jayasena, and to Joyce Harper. I think they've been brilliant panellists, and I know that you'll be asking us at the Wellbeing headquarters to invite them back again, and they're just going to have to grin and bear it and agree. So I'll invite them back again. Thank you for being such wonderful communicators and for giving us your time. We really, really appreciate it. So thank you to everybody. And I hope the rest of your Wednesday, the 9th of April goes really, really well. Don't forget to go onto the Wellbeing website and look at that period checker and look at the Menopause Workplace Pledge. Bye-bye.